This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at Limited Edition Alpha. Lately, in this series, I've been looking at Magic sets in chronological order, and I'm all the way up to Stronghold, or at least that's what I was thinking, but I recently realized I never did Magic's very first set, Limited Edition Alpha, usually just called Alpha. That's a pretty big oversight, so I thought I would remedy that today. Alpha was released on August 5th, 1993, and it was absolutely groundbreaking. After all, it originated the very idea of the trading card game, in addition to establishing most of the card types and rules that we still use today. So it's important in the history of Magic and the history of gaming more broadly, but the set was also absolutely filled to the brim with super powerful cards. Obviously, they hadn't figured out balance issues entirely or even how they wanted a trading card game to work when they printed this set. For example, they never really imagined people would try to get multiple copies of powerful cards. They sort of envisioned things being more like Limited today, where someone would buy some packs and put a deck together, but obviously that's not exactly how things ended up working. In fact, when this set came out, there wasn't even a restriction that you could only play 4 of a single card, and it caused all kinds of problems, especially because the set has lots of insane cards that are considered among the most powerful cards ever printed. And in fact, this list is the most stacked list I've ever done, and keep in mind I've done more than 630 of these. It took 255 points to make the list, and the top 9 all have 300 or more points, and the top 4 all have more than 500. Iconic and powerful cards like Lana War Elves, Time Vault, Balance, and Time Twister couldn't even make the list. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, this includes events like Regional Championships. Alright, let's take a look at the top 10 cards from Limited Edition Alpha. At number 10, it's Dark Ritual. For 1 black mana, this instant gives you 3 black mana. Fast mana is going to be a recurring theme on this list. They obviously didn't realize how busted it could be, which is hard for us to believe these days, but anyway, in the early days, the scary turn 1 play was Dark Ritual into Hypnotic Spectre. If your opponent couldn't do something about that, they often lost the game because the Spectre would rip apart their hand and make it hard for them to defend themselves. Later on, it became all about Dark Ritual and Necropotence, and basically for the first several years of the game's history, it was mostly just used to power out things early, which is already pretty strong. But then in 2003, the Storm mechanic made its debut and Dark Ritual found a new purpose, helping Storm decks get stupid high Storm counts. Spells that give you mana are perfect for Storm because they not only add to your Storm count, they give you more mana to keep casting other spells, and you can keep this up until you can cast something like a lethal Tendrils of Agony. It's going to continue to gain points in the Eternal formats and especially in Legacy. However, as you can probably guess, the rest of this list is also still active, so I'm not sure Dark Ritual will ever move any higher. At number 9, it's Mana Vault, another card that rapidly accelerates your mana. This 1 mana artifact can be tapped for 3 colorless, so it's sort of like a colorless Dark Ritual. However, it sticks around on the battlefield, albeit with the downside. You can only untap it if you pay 4 mana to untap it during your upkeep. Additionally, if it's tapped at the beginning of your draw step, it does 1 damage to you. All that downside isn't that important though, as the headliner is really just the insane mana boost. These days Mana Vault is banned everywhere but Vintage, where it's restricted, but mini decks in the format play the 1 copy they are allowed, and that's the biggest factor in the more than 300 points it has accumulated over the years. At number 8, it's Counterspell. For 2 blue mana, this instant counters a spell. It's pretty nice how simple many of these alpha cards are. Anyway, obviously, this card really established what it is blue decks want to do in Magic, and the mechanic of countering spells has ended up being very central to the game in general. Counterspell has appeared in a whole lot of blue control decks over the years and in multiple formats. While it has 0 points in Vintage, a format with plenty of more powerful counterspell options, it has seen play everywhere else, and it definitely gets a boost from multiple reprints over the years, which gave it multiple runs through Standard and Extended, and it's also one of only 3 cards on the list that is legal in Modern. It's continually added to its score over the years, especially in Legacy, and that's not going to change. At number 7, it is Birds of Paradise, a 1 mana 0/1 with flying that can tap for 1 mana of any color. That's a powerful thing because it lets you play out your 3 mana cards a turn earlier than your opponent can, and that's a good way to get ahead. Just as Counterspell helped establish one of Blue's core abilities, Birds of Paradise, along with Llanowar Elves, helped establish the idea that Green wanted to ramp mana. Like many cards on the list, it's been continuously played ever since being printed, gaining at least 1 point every year since competitive Magic began in 1994. We don't need to go deep on all the different decks the birds have been played in, as that would be an incredibly long and boring video, but suffice it to say, it's been helping green decks get things out a turn early for a very, very long time, and it's going to keep doing it. Fun fact, Birds of Paradise is the only creature on this list, and that reflects the fact that during the game's early years, non-creature spells were more powerful than creatures. For the most part, every good creature card in Alpha, like Serra Angel or Shivan Dragon, has really been power crept over the years. However, that's not true of Birds of Paradise, which still sees a lot of play today. At number 6, it's Swords to Plowshares. For 1 white mana, this instant exiles a creature and its controller gains life equal to its power. This is simply one of the best removal spells ever printed, and really it might have the claim to the best removal spell ever printed. As 1 mana to deal with almost any creature at instant speed is incredible. Sure, your opponent gains life, but who cares when the removal is this powerful? Sometimes that can be upside, since you can use it on your own creature in a pinch if you really need the life, but that's sort of an emergency situation use case. Like Birds of Paradise, it has gained at least 1 point every single year since competitive Magic began in 1994. While it isn't legal in Modern like Birds of Paradise or Counterspell, it gained a ton of points in the days of the extended format and still finds a ton of success in Legacy and Vintage, where it's effectively a staple. It's going to keep on seeing play. At number 5, it's Demonic Tudor. For 1 generic and a black, this sorcery lets you search your library for any card and put it into your hand. Black was the best color at tutoring in Alpha, and it's still the best color for it today. It was very clear that Demonic Tudor was busted, even from the beginning, so when they started banning and restricting cards in 1994, it found itself on the restricted list by the second announcement. Honestly, the fact that they didn't get it with that first announcement is a little surprising because it's just that powerful. It makes your deck way too consistent and can allow you to set up absurd combos very easily. It's been restricted or banned in every format since then, and these days it's only legal as a one-of in Vintage. It still manages its massive score since it's been a staple in the format for so very long, and virtually any black deck in the format still runs 1 Demonic Tudor. Most events have multiple decks in the top 8 that run one of these, and that's not going to change probably ever. At number 4, it's Lightning Bolt, Magic's first and most iconic burn spell, and another card that established part of the core identity of a color, in this case, red. You just can't beat 1 mana to do 3 damage to anything at instant speed. The Bolt has benefited from many reprints over the years, like Birds of Paradise and Counterspell, and it also happens to be legal in Modern like they are. On top of that, the Bolt remains powerful enough to see heavy play in both Legacy and Vintage, and that combination has allowed it to amass its absolutely massive score of 529 points, although that score was only good enough for number 4 on this list. If you're playing red in just about any format where the Bolt is legal, you're probably running Lightning Bolt, and that's not going to change either. At number 3, it's Soul Ring. For 1 generic mana, the ring is an artifact that can tap for 2 mana, giving you an incredible and permanent mana boost. In fact, that advantage is so great that Soul Ring is only legal in Vintage where it's restricted, and it's maintained that status for the entire time Wizards has had a banned and restricted list, being banned right alongside the Power 9 in the first announcement in 1994. With too many of these around, things would get truly degenerate, and often would just come down to who drew Soul Ring first. Almost all of its points have come in Vintage, with the only exception being 4 points for Magic's very first World Championship in 1994. While that format wasn't technically standard, as the idea of formats didn't even exist yet, I do classify it as a standard event because that's the closest analog. Since then, it's been a staple in Vintage, appearing in more decks than it doesn't. At number 2, it's the Dual Land Cycle from Alpha, which is, obviously enough, the original Dual Land Cycle. These 10 lands all have 2 land types that can tap for mana of those 2 colors. Fun fact, they messed up in the first printing of Limited Edition, and Volcanic Island isn't actually in the set. I still have it here because it was supposed to be, and it was printed in Limited Edition Beta and Unlimited. Obviously enough, these are the best dual lands in the game, as they come with virtually no downside, and they can be searched up by cards that look for cards with land types, like fetch lands. Obviously enough, as lands, these are pretty essential if you're playing Vintage or Legacy, and they were also legal and extended for a while back in the day, allowing them to amass their massive score. And at number 1, of course, it's the Power 9, apart from poor Time Twister, which just isn't on the same level as the other 8, and didn't even make the list with only 110 points. I put these together because they have a very similar history, and because giving every single one of these a slot would make the list very boring. Like Sol Ring, these 8 cards were all restricted in every format in the game's very first ban and restricted announcement. Black Lotus is the most powerful of the bunch, of course, as it's a 0 mana artifact you can sacrifice for 3 mana of one color. After that comes the Moxen, all of which are 0 mana artifacts that can tap for 1 mana of a single color. These colorless cards are staples in Vintage, as virtually every deck runs one of each of them because the mana advantage they grant is amazing. The other 2 cards are Time Walk and Ancestral Recall. Time Walk gives you an extra turn for 1 generic and a blue, and Recall costs 1 blue mana and makes a player draw 3 cards. Because those 2 are blue, they don't see quite as much play as the Moxen or the Lotus, but most Vintage decks have enough blue in them to run these 2 insanely powerful spells. The Power 9, apart from Time Twister, are definitely the 8 most powerful cards in Alpha and the most powerful cards in the history of Magic, so they're never going to relinquish their spot at the top of this list. So those are the top 10 cards from Alpha. This list was the most powerful one I've ever done, and it was a lot of fun. If you want to own any of these cards, including cheaper non-alpha printings, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at specific sets, you should see the playlists on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can do so by becoming a channel member or a patron. You can find ways to do those things in the description. Thanks for watching.